I know it hurts, but that means it's working. That's the only indication.
I'm personally someone that started testosterone, started exogenous hormones at 14 years old.
When did someone tell you your face was not enough? Not a feeling, not an interpretation. An actual person in your actual life looking at you saying those words. For most people watching this video, and I'm willing to bet on this, the honest answer is nobody. Nobody told you that. And yet you believe it. You believe it with enough certainty to change your behavior, to avoid certain situations, to let certain opportunities pass, to decide before anything has even started that the answer will be no. There are young men right now, today as you watch this, who are hitting their own faces with hammers. The practice is called bone smashing. The theory, microfractures in facial bones heal stronger and more prominently. That you can physically engineer the jaw structure the internet has decided is the standard of male attractiveness. It started as a joke on an anonymous forum. Then some people tried it. Then it became content. Then it became a subculture. I'm not going to pretend this is the most extreme thing happening in the world right now. It is not. But it might be the most revealing. Because behind the hammer, behind the surgeries, the starvapsing, the leg lengthening procedures, the entire industrial ecosystem that has built itself around fixing what is wrong with your face, there is a belief, a very specific, very precise, the belief that you have already been judged, that somewhere somehow the verdict on your face has been rendered, that the score has been assigned, that the number is real and the number is low, and that the only possible response is to fix the face. Not because you personally want to look different, but because the judge has spoken and the judge cannot be questioned. Let me explain what Looksmaxxing is for anyone who has not encountered it. The basic idea, your face is a project. Your bone structure, your jawline, your facial symmetry, these are not fixed features, they are variables. And with enough effort, enough discipline, enough willingness to go as far as necessary, you can optimize them. The entry-level version, soft maxing, is fairly benign. Good skincare, the gym, a better haircut. The kind of self-improvement that every generation of young men has pursued under different names. But the logic does not stop at the gym. The logic has a destination, and the destination is a very specific face. Hunter eyes, a sharp, angular jawline, high cheekbones, facial symmetry measured and assessed with near-clinical precision. These are not preferences. In the Looksmaxxing framework, they are objective standards. I want to be precise about something before we go further. I'm not dismissing the experience that drives someone into these communities. The anxiety about appearance is real. The social disadvantages of certain physical presentations are documented. And for young men growing up with social media that algorithmically surfaces the most physically extreme examples of human appearance as the norm, the anxiety is not irrational. What is irrational is the source of the verdict. Because here's the question nobody in these communities ever seems to ask out loud. Who is the judge? Who specifically has looked at your face and rendered the verdict that it is over? What real person in your actual life has told you directly, clearly, without ambiguity, that your face disqualifies you? For most people in these communities, the honest answer is nobody. The verdict came from a forum, from an algorithm, from a rating system populated by anonymous accounts scoring strangers on the internet, from a court that never actually sat. In 1897, Edmond Rostand wrote a play about a man with the most famous ugly face in French literature. His nose was enormous, grotesque, the kind of physical feature that, in any world that judged people by their faces, would have ended the conversation before it started. For anyone who has not read the play, here's what you need to know. Cyrano de Bergerac is a real historical figure who Rostand turned into a dramatic legend. In the play, he is a soldier and a poet, both to an extraordinary degree. A man who could compose a ballade while fighting a duel and finish the poem at the moment his sword found its mark. A satirist sharp enough to make powerful men fear him. A mind that operated at a level that made everyone around him feel both inferior and somehow better for having been near it. He also has a nose of spectacular size. Enormous, impossible. The first thing anyone notices when he enters a room. But the people around Cyrano, his closest friend Lebret, the cadets of Gascony who would follow him anywhere, none of them dismissed him because of the nose. They acknowledged it, they didn't lie about it, but it was not for them a disqualification. And here is one of the most important things in the play. Nobody judged Cyrano for his nose. Nobody except Cyrano. And then there's Roxane. She is also beautiful in a way that the 17th century noticed and rewarded publicly. Cyrano loves her the way people love things they have decided they cannot have. And then a young soldier arrives in Cyrano's regiment. His name is Christian. Christian is everything the visible world rewards. He is beautiful, genuinely strikingly, in the way that stops conversations and opens doors. The kind of face that the Looksmaxxing forum would rate without hesitation. He is also, by his own admission, unable to speak to a woman he loves. When he tries to express himself, what comes out is stilted, clumsy, embarrassing. He has the face, he does not have the voice. Roxane has noticed Christian. She asks Cyrano, her cousin, her trusted confidant, to look after him. And in the same breath, she tells Cyrano that she is in love with Christian. Cyrano, who has just been on the verge of telling Roxane how he feels, says nothing. He swallows it. Completely, immediately. And then he does something that only makes sense if you understand the logic of the imaginary judge. He offers Christian a deal. Christian will speak Cyrano's words. Cyrano will write the letters, compose the poetry, find the exact phrase for every feeling that Christian cannot express. Roxane will fall in love, not with the face alone, not with the voice alone, but with the combination. A person who does not actually exist, a fiction made of one man's beauty and another man's soul. Christian agrees, and it works. Of course it works. Cyrano's words are extraordinary. Under the balcony at night, speaking in the dark where the face cannot be seen. The voice alone is enough to make Roxane's breath catch. She falls in love deeply, genuinely, with something that is at its core entirely Cyrano. Why does Cyrano do this? The obvious answer is, because he loves her and wants her to be happy, even if it cannot be with him. He says, let me at least have this. Let me speak, and have her respond even if the response is aimed at another face. Because the alternative, telling her the truth and risking her refusal, is something Cyrano cannot face, not because the refusal would be certain, but because it would be real. Think about the architecture of what Cyrano has built. He gets to hear his words move her. He gets to see her respond to his mind. He gets the proof night after night, letter after letter, that what he has to offer is extraordinary. But he gets all of that without ever having to discover whether she would love him, without ever having to hear the answer to the question he is most afraid of. He catches a little of the love as it passes through, second-hand, filtered through Christian's face, enough to live on, not enough to change the verdict. This is the most human thing in the play, and the most devastating. Because Cyrano is not a fool. He knows exactly what he is doing. He is choosing the smaller, safer, indirect version of the thing he wants. So he arranges his life to get as close as possible to what he loves, while making absolutely certain that what he loves can never get close enough to see him clearly. And now for the detail that changes everything. The people around Cyrano do not share his verdict. Roxane herself, when we finally understand the truth in the last act, has been in love with the person behind the voice for years. Not Christian, the voice, which was always Cyrano. The judge that made the scheme necessary, that made 15 years of second-hand love preferable to one moment of direct vulnerability, was a judge he had appointed himself. There is something that both Cyrano and the Looksmaxxing community share, something more specific than insecurity: an imaginary judge. The imaginary judge is the verdict you have accepted from a court that never actually sat. At some point, usually early, usually during the years when you were most vulnerable, you received a signal, maybe it was direct, a comment about your appearance, a comparison, a moment when someone's reaction told you that something about how you looked was wrong. Maybe it was indirect. The absence of the attention that other people got, the sense that social rewards were being distributed according to a logic you didn't meet. Maybe it was the internet. The algorithmic surfacing of faces so extreme and so consistently presented as the standard that your own face, ordinary and human, began to feel like a deviation rather than an instance of the norm. However it arrived, you took the signal and built a verdict, a precise, detailed, internally consistent verdict about your face. And then the verdict started running automatically, before every social situation, before every mirror, before every interaction with a person you found attractive. The judge speaks first, always. Before anything has happened, before anyone has responded, the verdict precedes the evidence. This is why Looksmaxxing cannot work. not because it is impossible to change your appearance, but because the judge is not responding to your appearance. The studies on attractiveness bias are real. Appearance does affect social outcomes, but the gap between what the research shows and what the Looksmaxxing framework requires is enormous. The Looksmaxxing framework requires that a specific set of facial features are the deterministic gates through which all human connection passes. That is not what the research shows. That is what the imaginary judge has decided. And when you operate under the imaginary judge's verdict, something very specific happens. You stop gathering real information about how real people actually respond to you. Every positive signal gets filtered through the verdict and dismissed. They are being polite, they don't mean it. It would not last if they really knew every negative signal gets absorbed as confirmation. The judge was right all along. The verdict cannot be disproven from inside the framework, because the framework processes all evidence in the direction of its conclusion. Cyrano did this for 15 years. 15 years of giving his voice to another man's face. 15 years of Roxanne responding to him directly, genuinely, with increasing depth and love, and filtering every response through the verdict. She loves the words, she would not love the face the judge has spoken. He never tested it. He could not test it, because the moment he tested it, the verdict was at risk. And a verdict that cannot be tested cannot be wrong. Here is the most disturbing thing about the imaginary judge. It is not a defense against pain. It is a defense against the possibility of being wrong about the pain. As long as the verdict stands untested, the story you're telling yourself about your face, about what it makes impossible, remains protected. And some part of you would rather be right about the verdict than risk finding out the verdict was false. The bone smashing, the surgeries, the leg lengthening procedures, they are not attempts to become acceptable to real people. They are attempts to satisfy a judge who does not exist. Fix the jaw. The eyes are wrong. Fix the eyes. The height is wrong. Fix the height. The frame is wrong. There is always another variable. There is always another category in which you are insufficient, because the insufficiency is not in the face. The insufficiency is in the judge, and you put it there. Cyrano de Bergerac does not end well. Cyrano is dying from an ambush, a coward's attack. A log dropped on his head from a window when Roxane finally understands. She hears him speak. Delirious, barely conscious, he recites a letter he wrote to Christian years ago, the letter he wrote as himself for a face that was not his, and she recognizes the voice, not Christian's voice. The voice from the letters, the voice from under the balcony, the voice she has been in love with for 15 years without knowing who it belonged to. She tells him, she loves him, she has always loved him, not the face, the voice, the person. He dies having heard it, 15 years too late. Rostand gives you something more valuable than a happy ending. He gives you the evidence that the imaginary judge was wrong, that Roxane had never needed the face to be different, that the obstacle was never the nose. The obstacle was the 15 years Cyrano spent arranging his life so the verdict could never be tested. The tragedy is not that he was unlovable. The tragedy is that he was loved and built an entire life to avoid finding that out. Now apply that to the Looksmaxxing framework. The anxiety about appearance that drives someone into those communities is real. The loneliness is real. The sense of exclusion is real. And some of that exclusion has genuine social causes. But the framework takes that real pain and gives it an explanation that cannot be disproven. The young man who hits his face with a hammer is not responding to rejection. He is responding to a verdict he has already accepted. And no amount of bone remodeling will change the verdict. Because the verdict is not about the bones. What would change the verdict? Not a better jawline, not a higher score on a forum. What would change the verdict is what would have freed Cyrano. Showing up, letting real people, in real interactions, actually respond to who you are. Tolerating the uncertainty of not knowing in advance what that response will be. Letting the verdict be tested by evidence rather than protected from it. That is not a guarantee. Rostand does not offer one. Real rejection exists. Real social disadvantage exists. Not every risk is rewarded. But the Looksmaxxing framework offers something worse than no guarantee. It offers a guarantee of the wrong thing. It guarantees that you will spend years, possibly the most socially formative years of your life, optimizing for a judge who has never sat, while the real interactions, the real responses, the real evidence about how real people actually receive you goes ungathered. Cyrano de Bergerac was written in 1897. There was no TikTok, no forum, no rating system, but there was the same architecture. A man who had decided in advance of the evidence that his face disqualified him from the thing he most wanted. Rostand wrote this because it was true in 1897. It is true now, the specific technologies are new. The algorithm that serves increasingly extreme physical standards to teenage boys until their own face feels like a deviation. The anonymous rating systems that turn a human face into a score. The communities that have built entire frameworks of self-condemnation and called it realism. I'm not going to tell you that appearance does not matter. It does. I'm not going to tell you that the social advantages of certain physical presentations are invented. They are not. I'm going to tell you what Rostand showed in 1897 and what the evidence shows now. The judge is almost always less severe than you think. And the verdict is almost always something you issued yourself. The real people in your real life are responding to something much more complex than your jawline. They are responding to how you speak, to what you find funny, to whether you make them feel seen, to what you do when something is hard, to the quality of your attention when they talk to things that no amount of bone smashing touches, to things that are in fact already there. Cyrano had all of them. He just never let himself believe it. The question this video ends with is the one Cyrano never asked himself. Not what is wrong with my face, but who told me the verdict? And have I ever actually checked if they were right?